Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they're released. Today's film we're talking about is the latest MCU entry, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which stars Letitia Wright, Lupita Nyong'o, Angela Bassett and Winston Duke, and is directed by Ryan Coogler. So if you've been on the channel for a while, you'll know that while I certainly was on a bit of a Marvel high as last year ended with Spider-Man No Way Home and just the overall feeling, while the last year wasn't the best year of Marvel by any means, with things like Eternals and Black Widow, which were just passable as an MCU film, certainly not the worst ever, but nothing really to write home about. I went into this year of MCU with optimism, and the reason I'm kind of having this kind of summary of MCU to start this review is I have really had a souring of late of MCU. The television shows aside, which have been very hit and miss for this year, with Moon Knight being the real standout of MCU to me overall, and then we had Doctor Strange, which I was quite disappointed in. I have a full review of that, of course, on the channel. Thor Love and Thunder, which I think I enjoyed more than some people, but still didn't love and fell way short of what Ragnarok was able to achieve. And then now we're coming into Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever, and it was the one, actually, truthfully, going into this year that I was the least excited for movie-wise. Because, listen, I get it. I get that Black Panther 1 had this real cultural significance, and I all for it. It being the only one that was Oscar nominated, should I say? It was the only one being an Oscar nominated, and for significance, I get that, and it absolutely has its place. But as a film, I didn't love the first film by any means. I thought it was very mid-tier when it came to storytelling, when it came to just about everything. There wasn't really too much that stood out. But one thing that did stand out, certainly in his first appearance in Civil War and in his own standalone movie, even in addition to his appearances in Infinity War and Endgame, was Chadwick Boseman's portrayal of the Black Panther character. Chadwick Boseman, of course, is heartbreakingly no longer with us, and that was something that, when I heard that, they're still going ahead with the sequel. They're still going to, and they're not replacing the actor. They're just going to you're going to work it into the story. I was very skeptical, as I'm sure a lot of you were too. I went into this, and you have your lead. You know, it's not many films that are able to achieve their lead not being there and still being able to tell a worthy story. So I went into this certainly with some skepticism, and I didn't really come in with much hope, I'll admit. And already not loving the first film, bar Chadwick Boseman's performance. But something I do want to touch on, and this is something that it always kind of stuck with me, that the actual best performance and the best story being told for the Black Panther character wasn't in the Black Panther movie itself. It was in Civil War, his introduction. The story of obviously Civil War, the whole narrative is based around the conflict between Captain America and Iron Man and the Sokovia Accords, and that I enjoy Civil War a lot, as I'm sure a lot of you do as well. It's one of the better MCU movies around that time, and the kind of underlying story, obviously you've got the introduction of the Black Panther character and Chadwick Boseman's introduction overall to the MCU is handled very well in that film. And it actually goes a bit under the radar because you've got the airport fight scene. You've got a lot of things that draws our attention away. But the underlying story being told of the Black Panther taking up the mantle, his father gets killed obviously in the film, and he has to assume the mantle before he's ready. And he assumes the mantle out of vengeance. He doesn't assume it in a noble way, a respectful way. He takes it on because he wants to use it to hunt down his father's killer, and takes it out of vengeance, as I say. And then you have that speech at the end where he has that great character arc. So by the time the end of that film he's a well-developed character who's went through his own character arc of taking the mantle on through vengeance and knowing that vengeance is not the answer. And that's something that that was where I really got a connection to the character. So whenever the Black Panther movie rolls around, the story arc's already been told. So that's where it struggles on a narrative beat. So taking this into this film in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I, again, as I say, was not too optimistic. So, did it exceed my expectations? Did it really blow my mind what they were able to achieve with Black Panther Wakanda Forever? Or was it really what I expected, which was kind of more mid-tier Marvel storylines and storytelling, and obviously that coupled with the loss of the lead, which just I didn't think it was going to be able to work. So does Black Panther Wakanda Forever deserve to be here? Does it honor Chadwick Boseman in a way? It certainly honors him well, and there certainly is a lot of emotional beats that hit home, and the heartstrings are pulled a bit with the tributes to him throughout this film, and how it's told in a storyline perspective of his passing, but also on a very real level too. That is something that's achieved well, and I'll give it that. But there is other positives to take for Black Panther Wakanda Forever. So we'll go through the positives before we get to some of the negatives, and see where I fell on this movie, because Black Panther 2 had some things that I did enjoy, and none less than Letitia Wright and Angela Bassett in particular's performances. Because in the first film, and her performances and her contribution to the MCU overall in things like Infinity War and also the first Black Panther movie, Shuri, played by Letitia Wright, has been a character that I quite enjoyed, but I wouldn't say was ever a standout or was someone that, properly changed my view of a film. She didn't. I never felt that her role in the story added so much. So whenever everybody kind of assumed, oh well, his sister in the storyline is going to take on the Black Panther and become this, I was a bit skeptical. I like Letitia Wright. Letitia Wright in one of my favorite performances actually is on television. It was in Black Mirror in season, I want to say season 3, the Black Museum episode, and that's been one of my favourite things that she's done so far. And I remember thinking then, I can't remember if that was just before Black Panther the movie or around that time, but I remember thinking to myself that she really has a lot to give, and obviously her taking the forefront of this film was a big ask and a lot of pressure on her shoulders. And I think for what she gives, she does great in this. But I mentioned her co-star just a moment ago in Angela Bassett. Angela Bassett at the first film was completely forgettable. You wouldn't even have... I personally forgot that she ever played a prominent role as T'Challa's mother, and obviously Shuri's mother too. But she is actually the part of this, and a bit like what I talked about recently in something like Black Adam, where Pierce Brosnan's character as Dr. Fate is not the main character by any means, but really builds on the story. And wasn't really a selling point. Angela Bassett for Black Panther Wakanda Forever wasn't a selling point for this film, but my goodness, does she give a great outing here. She was a performance that I was really taken aback by the kind of surrounding cast. Obviously someone like Lupita Nyong'o, I'm a big fan of, particularly in something like Us, by Jordan Peele a lot of years ago. She really stands out in that film. So whenever I seen that she was attached to Black Panther, I know it was about the same time, maybe Us was slightly after that, but then Lupita Nyong'o was completely wasted in the first film. I thought she was just a love interest. There was no addition, there was nothing to give her really in the first film, where she certainly gets to provide a lot more for this film. So her and Angela Bassett really stand out as supporting characters to Letitia Wright in this, and obviously it's a very woman-led film and they do a great job in this. But as on the man side of things, Winston Duke, who I'm a big fan of, him as in Baku in this, also he was in Us, but he doesn't get to do a lot in this film, and I feel that's a shame. I like Winston Duke a lot. I think him as in Baku was one of the better parts of the Black Panther storyline overall. So to have him as a bit part player in this, I thought there was a real waste opportunity there to build on his character and add a lot. He just kind of becomes just someone for the central characters like Letitia Wright and Lupita Nyong'o and Angela Bassett to kind of bounce off in the story. He doesn't really have his own arc going on. Yes, there's some action scenes, and I suppose that's another positive. The action scenes are pretty good, as I say, the special effects and CGI. There's not much point talking about things like that anymore. They're all pretty much good as it gets. But I would like to say that I did find that with Namor and the villain, and I'll get onto that in a moment, just as him as a performance and him as a villain, but there is a bit of what I would call like video game, and that's not even an insult anymore because video games look unbelievable at this point, but kind of old school video game fight scenes, and it felt a bit like that, like a cutscene. There's a few bits where the villain is flying through the air, like jumping from ship to ship, and it does feel a bit kind of CGI-y. That's definitely not a term, but we'll go with it. That was something that I kind of took me a little bit out of the film. Not that any of the rest of the big crazy battles are anyway, but realistic in the MCU at this point. We're way past the point of reality, if that feels. And it's weird that a movie that's based, yes, Wakanda's a fictitious city or land or country or whatever it is, and obviously the underwater nature of the villain as well. All of that felt a bit, even though it's supposed to be on Earth, it does feel a bit fantastical. And it feels as fantastical as something like we saw in Thor Love and Thunder, where he's going from world to world, or Guardians of the Galaxy, or things like that. And that it detaches a little bit, because it is supposed to be Earth, and there is supposed to be an element of realness. And that's not on the CGI point, it's just kind of on a storytelling point. But that's not really something to get hung up on. That stuff is fine. But let's get into the negatives, because I do have to say that this film isn't much better than the original film, but I would say it edges it slightly for me. But I didn't love either of them, and Wakanda Forever has a good lot of negatives, so let's get into them. And the main thing, and something that I just couldn't shake from the first act, and it kind of carries through the whole film, is the pacing. This film has a lot of lulls. It has a lot of quiet's the wrong word, kind of dull and uninteresting story points that on the outset and in a writer's room I would imagine you would think would be more engaging, but in reality they're not played out too much of an engaging way. Yes, there's the action scenes that keep the audience interested, and that certainly does flow throughout the film, and yes, there is some pretty good action set pieces, as I mentioned, but the story being told, the chemistry between the characters, or even just scene by scene, it's not that interesting of a story. Yes, the performances are pretty good, as I mentioned, but there isn't a point where I was really like, wow, this is, like, I'm really locked into this. I wasn't checked out completely, that wasn't the case either. It was somewhere in between, but I wasn't like on the edge of my seat, or I wasn't fully engaged with the film, and I just really couldn't latch on to it. And I do remember that being the case for the first film too. And I don't know what it is that it just didn't click. Because again, as I say, I couldn't really put my finger on, because the performances are pretty good, the action scenes are pretty good, but as far as a story being told, there wasn't a whole lot there. You could probably, if I said to you, you've got the second film, Chadwick Boseman obviously isn't going to be in it, so how would you write it? You could probably guess 90% of the story arc in this. Another addition I didn't mention was Ironheart, with the young lady who plays essentially like Tony Stark, who's at university, but there's like no mention of Tony Stark in any way. There's no inspiration there, there's no like tie-in. It's just like, oh yeah, she's basically Iron Woman, but we're not going to mention the obvious. that felt very strange, and I would assume that's a character that will continue to probably get her own Disney Plus series or movie or something. I don't know. Armor Wars, isn't that coming out? That's probably where she's going to be. Like, I don't know, and that's something that I just have this I had a lot of negatives about the film. You know, the pacing was and the length of the film too. I found myself like they were dragging it out. Like this film they got to 3 hours long, and it does not need to be that long. It really does not. This film could have had 20, 25 minutes even taken off it, and the story would have been the same. There's a lot of things drawn out that don't need to be. The story being told isn't overly complicated, so it's not like it needs a lot of explaining, a lot of important scenes of dialogue. It doesn't. There's a central villain, you know. As I said, I'll go into that a little bit. Namor as a villain has a pretty world-ending threat. You know, there is that element, but as a villain, there was nothing really there that made him stand out. It's basically there's so much, and I know anything with water, or any person who lives in water or has the control of the seas makes this connection. But it just was Aquaman, but worse. And I don't love the Aquaman film with Jason Momoa that much on the DC side of things, but like when that's the better option of what it was, you know, underwater civilization with a person who leads it and is destined to be king and all this stuff. It's essentially the same story beats for that, only one is villain and one is hero. It's essentially the villain. You know, the guy from Conjuring, I can't, Patrick something. His name escapes me. But him in Aquaman is essentially Namor in this, but there's no Aquaman. He's fighting the Black Panther. That's what it is. That's what this film is, and there was nothing really there. There isn't a lot here, and that's what it all boils down to. And maybe this is me being a sour old man talking about this in the same way that I was, and just talking about, as I started this video, my Marvel experience as a whole this year. You know, last December, like a lot of you probably were, it's one of the highest grossing films ever in Spider-Man No Way Home. Probably so many of us did, definitely so many of us did, watched it maybe 1, 2, and 3 times before it left the theatres, and then it came back, and then we probably seen it again. You know, they added a few bit of footage. Like, No Way Home's a great film. Not only does it have the, oh my god, there's the addition of the characters. Yeah, there's that. There's that draw it in factor. But it's also one of the best told Spider-Man stories, and hero stories in general in the last while. And that's what, like, it genuinely isn't just nostalgia bait. It properly is a brilliant film. Whereas I found that they could have went from strength to strength from that. Because we had Endgame that went into Far From Home. And that was not going from strength to strength, but certainly Far From Home, the second Spider-Man out in Tom Holland, was, you know, keep it at a certain level. Endgame was like this big, massive event. And it didn't dip too much in quality to get to Far From Home because it was a different story completely, but it also had a lot of the good things that Marvel can bring. But I've just felt like in this last while, Marvel's just dropping, and it does feel like it's just spouting out content instead of actually honing its craft like it was in the first Infinity Saga, isn't that what they called it? Of the first 20 whatever movies that ended up with Endgame and Infinity War and everything. And I've said a lot of this stuff last year when I talked about Eternals for a long period, or, you know, I just do find myself souring on Marvel a little bit, and I hope they can bring me back in, and I don't doubt that they probably can. Next year we've got something like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I hope they can hook me back in. But talking about this film specifically, and going back to Black Panther Wakanda Forever, it is just fine. In simplistic terms, I could go into all the details like we have and just revisit all points, but the simple fact is Black Panther Wakanda Forever is probably it is exactly what I expected. I went in and got a film I didn't really like, with a great lead in Chadwick Boseman, and while he's great in the first film, and obviously he can't be in this one, and while people try their best, Letitia Wright, I'm rooting for her all the way, and she did great. So did Angela Bassett. So did the other performances. The performances in the film are good, and there isn't anybody that does a step up to the mark with the absence of the lead. So I'm full commendations to all of them for that. But as a film, as a story being told, it fell flat for me for a lot of things, and I just can't really look past it. You know, and even when I talked about something like Doctor Strange earlier in the year, there was even though I didn't like that story being told, and I felt the story being told wasn't told in an effective way, there was good stuff in there. Elizabeth Olsen in particular, I remember going off on a bit of a tangent talking about how great she was in the film. I just don't know that I even enjoyed this as much as that, and that's quite a shame. Quite a shame. Looking at that score on IMDb, people are seem to be quite enjoying this film. And you know what? Who am I to tell them otherwise? If you enjoy this film, I'm all for it. All you can ask when anybody goes to the cinema is that they enjoy what they're seeing. And if people enjoy this, I love that for them. But for me personally, it's just not my... I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't love it. I didn't latch on to it. And, you know, 2 movies into this Black Panther now, I would imagine it's going to be at least a trilogy of 3 films. And I can't say I'm overly enthusiastic about the 3rd one whenever that inevitably, you know, is released. Yeah, Black Panther for me is it a 6 out of 10? Yeah, you know what, I'll be nice. 6 out of 10. Because I would say that the good does outweigh the bad in this film. And you're probably thinking, oh, well, you've just been really harsh to it for the last 5-10 minutes. Why are you... Yeah, you know, being objective. The performances and the action scenes, and yeah, it is a 6 out of 10. That's me being generous. If I was going just on story alone, it's probably like a 4, but the performances and the action and, you know, some of the Marvel mannerisms that does hit and does land bumps it up a little slightly. But no, Black Panther Wakanda Forever is not a film that I'm going to be remembering too fondly. It's just fine. And I think that's more offensive than anything. I'd rather they really set their stall out and tried to do something really special and fell flat on their face than just do the safe option. And that's kind of what this felt like. Inoffensive. You know, they tried a little bit. You know, the villain, as I say, seemed like a bit of a copy and paste job with a lot of tropes that have already been applied to other villains. The story beats that you would imagine, or as I say, you could write yourself of what happens with the, you know, what's the next step now that Chadwick's obviously not here. Yeah, good performances and action aside, it's just nothing too much to write home about. And I'm sure a lot of people disagree. I'm sure a lot of people love this film a lot more than I did. And as I say, I would, and you know that if you've been on the channel for a while, you know how much I would never discredit someone for enjoying it. If you thought this was 10 out of 10, I love that. I love that, and I love that you enjoyed it. But for me personally, it just didn't hit the marks I wanted. And it's as simple as that. So yeah, that's been my initial thoughts on Wakanda Forever. Not one of my most glowing reviews, I'll admit, and yeah, it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be surprised by it, and that again applies to Marvel as a whole this year. Thor: Love and Thunder I did enjoy for what it was, but didn't love. Moon Knight, as far as the television side of things, was the only thing on there that I actually did enjoy. But as far as Marvel as a whole, and coming off that high that was the end of last year and Spider-Man No Way Home, Marvel's dropped the ball for me. And I'm sure a lot of you guys probably feel the same to some extent. That this year could have been a real statement year for Marvel, but instead it's felt like they're a bit lost. Their storytelling, their narratives, and I get that not every single story has to be connected in every way. I get that, and I don't want that either. But it does feel that it's a bit of an incoherent mess at the minute. Nothing, even the stories being told, they don't know what they want to be. They don't know how much they want to delve into other stories and be connected, or stand alone and be their own thing. And by doing that, they all just kind of because they're caught in limbo between the two, they're not able to achieve. If they want to just be standalone great films, they can't do that because they're tying themselves into knot because they're building up to future things and adding another 15 heroes per movie, and it's just, it gets a bit tiresome after a while. And again, maybe that's just me not getting it, but the way they did it so well and so naturally over the, as I mentioned, the Infinity Saga, you know, from Iron Man through to Endgame, they did that naturally. It wasn't like by Endgame you were like, oh right, well there they are, yeah, we get it, that's all the heroes we've been building up for. No, it felt like a natural thing. It felt like, oh yeah, look at how much we're actually attached to all these characters that are in this battle scene. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't like we were introduced to people in there. It wasn't like we were, you know, having to learn and having to guess, and we've lived it, and you got a reward as being a fan, whereas now it seems like more of a chore, and that maybe that's a bit harsh for a lot of these films, but no, I find myself souring a little bit of Marvel in the last while, and you probably have sensed that in the last 2 Marvel reviews as well, so this has just been kind of a summary of that. Unfortunately, that kind of took up most of the video, and a lot of it hasn't really been too focused on Black Panther itself, so apologies for that, but I thought I would just kind of blend the two as one, and as you know, this is just me turning on the microphone and chatting. I don't really have a script, I just start talking, and yeah, this is just how I feel. But no. Well, anyway, that's that tangent. Yeah, and I know I've went off on a bit of a tangent there for all that, so thanks for sticking with me. And if you did enjoy the video, if you're with me, if you want to stick with the channel and stick with me while I talk about movies and different, you know, we have a good lot to go. I would imagine there's about 2 or 3 videos between now and Christmas, which is only a month away, which is crazy to think about. This year's flew in, and there's been so many things on the channel that have been great so far and well received, and I appreciate you all so much for sticking with me. The subscriber count's increasing in such an amazing rate, and it's kind of mind-blowing at this point. So if you do want to stick around and you did enjoy the video, leave a like, let me know, subscribe, stick around, hit the bell, and yeah, I appreciate you all so much, as you know, and I'd love for you to stick around. And if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.